So you're looking to advance your education. Maybe you're from the EU, maybe you're not from the EU, but somehow Portugal has come on your radar. I want to give you a full breakdown, or basically everything you need to know about studying or being an international student in Portugal. Just to give you a little bit of context, my name is Chantel. I'm originally from Jamaica and I moved to Portugal in 2021 to pursue a master's in film after studying my bachelor's in anthropology in Jamaica. So the first thing I want to talk about is education quality. And I'm going to be looking at my notes, so excuse me if you see me looking down a lot. But I want to make sure that I give you precise information and detailed information that you can look back on. So I would say the educational quality in general is at a midpoint. And if I should rate it from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would give it a 5. And I'm coming from Jamaica, as I mentioned, and I would say that the overall educational quality in Jamaica is like 1 point or 1.5 point higher than Portugal. I would give my experience in Jamaica a 6 or 6.5. And I'm gonna break down exactly why I gave Portugal a 6. But firstly, I wanna define what educational quality is so you can have an understanding as to what basis I'm using to measure that. Before I get into the definition, I want to just remind you to like, share, and subscribe. It keeps me fueled to make more videos like this. It makes me know that, okay, more people are looking for content like this. And at the end of the video, if you want to buy me a coffee, you can. Okay, let's get to it. So first, let's define what educational quality is. Educational quality, from my point of view, refers to how effectively an educational program supports your learning, development, and future success. It's not just about having good teachers. It's a mix of different things like the relevance of the curriculum on a global scale, the teaching standards, teaching equipment, learning resources, student outcomes, international recognition, and even the inclusivity and support that the school gives. So, based on my experience in Portugal, I'm gonna go through and give each a rating from 1 to 10 and explain to you exactly why. And after I've evaluated my experience on the educational quality in Portugal, I'm also going to cover other topics such as cost of living and different things. So stay tuned. And if you're getting bored, just put your earphones in, go about your day, and pretend like this is a podcast. Okay. So I went to a private university in Lisbon. I won't reveal the name in this video because I don't want to dishonor my university. I just want to give you my experience. So I had an overall great experience. At my university, people were super open-minded and welcoming, especially the teachers. And I still think to date that I have the best advisor for my thesis that anyone in the world ever has or ever had. So just keep that in mind, even though I'm going down and giving scores and being honest. Let's start with curriculum relevance. I would give my experience an 8, and here's why. The skills that I learned in my program was very relevant to the film industry, as I felt like I left as a better filmmaker than when I went in. The program for me was a perfect pace because I was coming from anthropology, but I did some work in filmmaking. So I needed to learn many things in the filmmaking industry while still feeling challenged. And for me, it was a great mix. In terms of global ranking, according to the Times Higher Education the World University Rankings of 2025, my university is placed at around the 1,501 plus bracket. It just means that my university is ranked somewhere beyond the 1,500th position. So in terms of globally and also from that perspective, even though I learned a lot and earned like great skills, I still felt like the program did not prepare me to really excel globally, not just as a filmmaker, but just as a student, in my career. Of course, the onus is on me to search out opportunities, but I'm just telling you as it is and just being honest. Let's move on. Teaching standards. I would give the teaching standards a 3. I know it's on the lower end, but let me explain. Reason being, I felt like the professors were academically qualified and probably they were qualified to the standards of Portugal, but I felt a lot sometimes that the curriculum lacked substance, structure, and thought. At times, I felt it was too spontaneous and weak. Compared to Jamaica, the teaching standards were much lower. In Jamaica, I'm used to like more rigorous, well thought out curriculum with teachers who were very prepared, sometimes over prepared. And I feel like when you get an education in Jamaica, you excel wherever you go. If you ever met a Jamaican abroad in your classroom, testify in the comments and let me know. For me, I excelled a lot because of my experience in the educational system in Jamaica. For example, some of my courses were much easier for me than my Portuguese colleagues because in Jamaica, I was used to the heavy coursework. So when my colleagues were overwhelmed by a lot of coursework, for me, it was normal. I still supported them, of course, in relaying that to the department, but for me, it was not as heavy and not as pressuring as it may have been for them. In Jamaica, professors are usually really prepared, and I didn't feel that sometimes with my professors in Portugal. However, this is not to say that they weren't great teachers. They were. I had 2 main ones. One was my advisor, who is super phenomenal, and I had another professor he was so intelligent, he was so well read, and he knew how to convey that beautifully to us as students. So the teaching standard was not that high compared to Jamaica, in my opinion. That's what I'm saying. But again, I reiterate that overall the teachers in Portugal, from my experience, were very intelligent. That's one thing you can't take away from them. They were very intelligent, but because of the lack of preparation, that's why I gave it that low score. Another point on that is because sometimes teachers would cancel the classes last minute, and for me, I mean, sometimes I like that because as a student, sometimes you're not that motivated to go to class. But sometimes I was disappointed when I really liked a class and the teacher wrote while I was already at the university. After I traveled on the bus and arrived there, they wrote that, they weren't coming to class. So stuff like that. Also, I put into consideration when giving that score. Okay, learning resources. I would give that an 8. I would say that we had some awesome filming equipment. And so we had like different cameras, different light sources, different sound recording equipment. Some students who came as international students to Portugal who may have come from a better university with more variety and higher end equipment may not see the equipment at my university as really awesome. But for me, I was always so grateful and so, astonished by how much we had access to and how many tools we had to use as budding, uprising filmmakers. There was also a university library that we could use. I didn't really use it that much, but there was that. And also the teachers were really awesome in sending us resources that we needed for our thesis, or if we needed general knowledge about film or whatever topic related to that. I felt like teachers were very resourceful, so that's why I gave it an 8. Moving on. Inclusivity and support. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Why? Like, honestly, first of all, let me just say, my university blew me away because, I mean, they didn't get everything right, of course, but for context again, like, I was a Jamaican who did not speak Portuguese. I moved to a Portuguese speaking country to pursue a master's degree program that was 90% plus in Portuguese. That's bizarre. And you know what happened? I was met with so much like open arms, open mind. And I cannot praise my university, my professors, and even my colleagues for their patience enough for being so inclusive. Let me give you an example. Sometimes the professors would arrange like a Zoom meeting like after class for me in English to explain what they taught in Portuguese. And on top of that, they allowed me to submit everything in English, like all my coursework, my thesis. And one of the most noteworthy things is sometimes they even did the whole class in English just for me. And to put it into context, there were 17 of us. And sometimes I felt bad, like, thinking about my Portuguese and Brazilian colleagues, because imagine being the only English speaker in the room. The professor is, speaking in English just for me. But think about, that's bizarre. And for me, that's so inclusive, so welcoming, so open. That's so amazing. And as I said, like, I'm thanking my university, my teachers, my colleagues for this experience. I want to go to the cost. I would give Portugal an 8 out of 10. Why? One of the reasons I chose Portugal was because of its lower tuition cost. Just to be plain with you, in Jamaica, the bachelor's in film, when I checked, is 6,700 USD per year. That's like 6,100 euros per year. And I thought it was like 8,000 USD because someone told me that before, but yeah, I checked it and I saw 6,000 plus. And Jamaica also didn't have a master's in film production degree. Also, I wanted to apply to study in Sweden, and the cost of that master's program in film was like over 1 million SEK kronas, which in euros it translates to like a bit over 100,000 euros. So that would work out to like 50,000 euros per year, which is still a lot for me. And my goal was to leave being debt free. I also checked out Estonia, I also checked out Poland, Germany, and then I stumbled upon Portugal. And I found this degree program that was a little under 4,000 euros per year, which would accumulate to a little under 8,000 euros for a 2-year master's degree program. To be clear with you, like, even though this was the cheapest option, that price is still high for a lot of Portuguese locals. And my university is private, as I mentioned, so everyone had to pay that price, whether you were a Portuguese citizen or not, whether you were from the EU or not, whether you're an international student or not. That price was for everyone. But it was still doable than paying 50k per year. And let's not even mention like studying in the US, because that's just debt. But even though Portugal and my university was a great option for me, cost-wise, I must say that my university was unreasonable, very fee-driven. Like, for example, when I got accepted into the program, they just sent me an email saying congrats, which was great, but Usually a university sends you an acceptance letter as well. I didn't get that, and I needed that to process my visa. Instead, I had to pay 85 euros just for an acceptance letter that should be free. And also, when I finished my degree program, to get my master's certificate, the cost was around like 350 euros. And also the application fee to apply to the university was also 350 euros as well. So as I said, like it's incredibly like fee driven, and sometimes it feels like mind-blowingly unreasonable. So I did want to mention that because that's also important to note if you do decide to go to a private university, that even though you're paying your tuition, there will be extra costs. Okay, let's move on. Student outcomes. And student outcomes refers to life after graduation and just graduation like rates. I would give this a 4 out of 10. I feel like in my experience, the graduation rate is high compared to Jamaica. Jamaica is much stricter. Even if you pay your fees, there are a lot of measures and regulations as to what you need to graduate, the scores you need to graduate. But I feel like the Portuguese system, from my experience, was just less stricter. They were more like, once you paid your fees, I didn't see like much restriction as to whether you can graduate or not, especially if you maintain decent grades. I give it a 4 because after graduation, the support is not great at all. Like when you leave, I feel like you're mostly on your own. I got a list of companies from my university after asking them like about some internship opportunities, but that's it. But you rarely have opportunities secured like before you graduate, even after you graduate. I feel like it's just a place to get a degree and that's it. It's like, where's the help? I would have wished there was more help. And I imagined this differently because I thought our university would be better at that, given that it is the top filming university in Portugal. And just to give you context, as I said, there were just 17 of us in the master's program. So I felt like there could have been better efforts to connect us to companies in Portugal or in Europe or in other parts of the world who need our skills. Because even though it's a master's in filmmaking, right now our skills are super relevant. You have AI filmmaking, which having a base in filmmaking helps, content creation, communication, in the whole marketing department, like that aesthetic eye, being able to communicate thoughts visually is very relevant. So that's why I give it a 4. And regarding international recognition, as I said before, I feel like I really don't have much of an idea how the degree itself is recognized internationally. But definitely universities in Portugal, in my opinion, and from what I've experienced, are not as well known. Even some locals didn't even know my university. Even when I told them where it was located, they had no idea. So I feel like regarding international recognition is quite low, but for me, I don't really care about that. For me, a degree is a degree once the university is accredited. Now let's move to other topics. So now I've finished the education quality. Let's move to cost of living in Portugal. So this second part is basically more broadly about Portugal, and the first part was more like you know deepening or your understanding about my experience specifically around the Portuguese educational system and my university experience. So this is now about Portugal. So cost of living. As a student, you need to cut costs. I would say that the cost of living, from aside from considering rent, is very doable, but with the rent, it's extremely difficult to survive as a student. In Lisbon, my experience is in Lisbon. But I feel like students in other cities may resonate, but I'm speaking about Lisbon. Also, I felt like my university and the government overall could do a better job in supporting students. So let's talk money. I would say the budget you need to survive as a student would be between, you can say circa like 750 euros to like 850 euros. That's the minimum. And right now I'm gonna pop your bubble. If you feel like you're gonna move here and you're just gonna spend 900 euros or less and have your own student apartment in Lisbon, it's highly unlikely. That was my goal, that was my vision. And for like, what, 2.5 years later, that didn't happen because Lisbon is ridiculously more expensive regarding like housing than you see on the internet, in my opinion. Well, that was my experience. So I will break down to you my budget so you can know exactly how to budget. I had to budget 500 euros per month for renting a room. So I rented my rooms mainly in central Lisbon, so mostly in places like Alameda, Arroios, Ajuda, Picoy, Saldanha. And I usually share like, generally the last 2 rooms I share with 2 other people, so it wasn't that, not the room itself but the apartment with 2 other people, so it wasn't that bad. The next is I spend 40 euros per month on public transportation. Portugal has a bus pass for like the Lisbon metropolitan area, and you can ride the trains, the metros, the buses, even bicycles now apparently. And this is super helpful because you just pay one price and you can ride everything, even the ferries and the boats, the ferries / boats. But a very pro tip is your period doesn't start the day you pay it. So let's say you arrive in Portugal, I don't know, like the 26th of the month, and that month has 30 days. You don't pay for the bus pass on the 26th and then renew it again next month on the 26th. All the bus passes, like the monthly ones, start on the 1st of the month. So even if you pay for your bus pass, let's say on May 26th, it will still expire on the last day in May, and you have to buy a new one January, February, March, April, May, June. In June, I made that mistake when I just came. I spent my 40 years. I'm like, I'm gonna have a bus pass for until the 26th of the next month, but no. So buy your bus passes on the 1st of the month. I think you can buy it already from the day before or 2 days before the 1st, but that's just a pro tip to keep in mind. I spend 40 euros per week on groceries, so that's about 160 euros per month. With this budget, I only went shopping once per week. This is the key. You gotta shop one day. Make a list and shop, because if you're going back to the supermarket a lot, you're gonna spend much. And with this budget, I was allowed to sufficiently buy enough fruits, veggies. I bought most of that from like the Bengali Asian markets because they're cheaper than the Portuguese markets, in my experience in Lisbon. I could buy enough carbs, enough meat for myself, and this budget would also allow me to occasionally invite a friend, and maybe a few, but not a lot. And I would recommend getting like a rewards card from your supermarket. Like Continent has that physical card or online card because you can save. Sometimes I up that budget to 50 euros because if I'm buying oil and laundry detergent and fabric softener in the same week, I have to up the budget to 50 euros because I usually buy olive oil and that's like 7 euros a bottle, and laundry detergent plus fabric softener is like almost 10 euros. So when I'm spending almost 20 euros on just 3 things, I don't have enough left for food and toiletries when I keep the budget at 40 euros during those weeks. So I usually up it to 50 euros. And the cheapest supermarket so far is Lidl. I love Lidl. A Portuguese friend recommended it to me. Shout out Maria. And definitely you get more for your money from Lidl, but the last place I was living at, Lidl was far, so I just shopped at Continent and it turned out fine. I got a little less, but over time things accumulated. And what I would say is to always buy groceries the same time every week. So like buy every Monday, or because it accumulates. So when you look in your cupboard and you have like an extra bag of rice or extra 2 bags of rice, and you usually buy 1 kilo of rice, 2 pounds of rice per week, don't not buy the rice because of the extra. Just still buy it and accumulate your storage, because that will allow, you know, you being able to not have an empty storage of food just in case. And also that gives you room to host people, because when you're hosting, you will cook more and you will you don't need to buy that much when you have more in storage. Okay, next I spent 10 euros on my phone data, which I bought from Woo, and I get like 5 gigabytes of data with like 1,000 talking minutes, and also some roaming gigabyte for when I'm traveling in the EU. You have other data plans you can buy where you can get more gigabytes, but I prefer to just stick to the cheapest option to keep things low. Okay, so I'm continuing the video with a different background, because I recorded this whole thing with the initial background and then half the video didn't get recorded. So I ate and then I came back to a different room. So let's continue with my budgeting and spending. So after usually along with my other expenses and the 10 euros for my data service with my phone, I usually spend or budget an additional 25 euros per month towards my football club. Yes, I'm in a football club, and usually this covers using the pitch, games with other teams, and also training from a coach. The other thing is that I usually budget about 40 euros per month on like software and memory for my phone. So for example, this includes Photoshop. I am a freelance photographer along with being a filmmaker, but I do a lot of photography and I use Photoshop, so I pay for that monthly, along with Google One and Apple Storage. The last thing usually that I budget for is 20 euros for going out. I know this is not a lot of money. I don't usually go out because I spend so much money, like so much, you know, according to my budget on groceries. So I usually don't go out. Maybe once a week after church on Sundays with my friends, but maybe, you know, one other day. But I usually budget 20 euros to go out. And sometimes I go like 10 to 20 euros over budget on this, because the 20 euros is honestly not realistic sometimes, especially if I want to go out to eat with friends like more than once per week. So as you can see, like understanding and looking at my budget, it's low, it's not that much, but I did struggle a lot with that, especially because I was earning most months lower than minimum wage. So the Portuguese minimum wage is circa 870 euros. So I was sometimes earning less than that. So I basically had to live from hand to mouth, as we say in Jamaica, and pinch. As you can see, there is zero room for saving, which hurt a lot as a young person, not being able to save. And also when I need something, like what if I need a new shoes? I remember once I had a pair of shoes and the bottom was rubbing out. Like a hole was starting to form, and just to go to the store and buy a shoes without thinking about every dollar was such a struggle. Like this budget and living like this, like even 5 euros, like how I'm spending €5, I am like thoughtful about that. I don't just go spend €5 because everything adds up. I don't just spend €10 because, as you can see, I can use that to pay my phone bill. So in the context, if I didn't do freelancing and I got a job, like imagine I'm working the max 20 hours per week. That's realistic, and also that's like the max you can work as a student. It wouldn't suffice. Imagine surviving on half of €870. You know what I mean? That's not a lot. Anyway, I wanna go down to talking a little bit more about accommodation options, because I explained to you about my budget and I want to share with you the options. And public universities offer residencias universitarias, which is like student residence sometimes, which is usually budget friendly and roughly about like 150 to €250 per month. I know someone who benefited from that. She's a dual citizen of Brazil and Portugal, and she benefited from that. I don't know if because she's Portuguese or have a Portuguese passport why she could benefit from that, but my university did not have any on-campus housing, which is something that I would have appreciated. So when I moved to Portugal initially, I was expecting more on-campus housing for students because in my mind I expected those to be cheaper. So what is more common for students in Portugal is off-campus housing, meaning you have to like find your accommodation yourself. I thought my university would also help me to find accommodation, but they didn't, so I had to go on websites such as Idealista, check on Facebook in order to find where to live. I'm thankful that the first place that I lived, I got it through an acquaintance, but for my other places, I've had to search on my own. Anyways, most students rent a room, and you can even end up sharing an apartment with up to 20 people. I've heard some students on Erasmus Mundus programs, for example, who shared apartments with like 19 other people with just 3 bathrooms to share amongst 20 people. That's bizarre, and that also gives you a little bit of a hint of the sort of standard of the accommodation here in Portugal. I feel like the standard can be quite low. It's usually out of date, and I feel like a lot of landlords tend to rent without updating. So you might experience like cold rooms during the winter and stuff like that. But the usual range of people you might share with is more like between 4 to 7, 4 to 10. And this whole sharing idea, especially with so many people, was unusual to me, unknown to me before I came here to Portugal. Because for me, okay, you're sharing with 2 other people, 3 other people, but 7 other people, 19 other people, that's much. But thankfully, I did not have that much experience with that. I did not have to experience that much because the max amount of people I ever shared with was 4 other girls. Housing can be competitive, and I want to talk a little bit about like, is it easy to find housing? I would say it can be competitive, especially if you're on a budget. You may have difficulties finding housing. And during September, October, when the new semester starts, it's even more difficult because you have a lot of Erasmus students moving to Portugal to study. And I would say that Erasmus, sometimes it affects the availability of housing rooms at a good cost sometimes for students like me who are studying long-term in Portugal. But Lisbon and Porto tends to have the highest demand, and usually I look for my rooms through Idealista. That's where I found most of my rooms. Some people found it through Facebook, which it's difficult because Facebook, there are more scams. Idealista also has scams, but it's a little bit better with that. And I've also heard people finding rooms through a website called Uniplaces. But I have heard terrible things about Uniplaces, so be aware. And please do not use Uniplaces because you heard about this in this video. I'm not promoting it whatsoever. I never used it and I've heard terrible things about there, so I wouldn't recommend it. Just search through Idealista. Also, you can look on Facebook groups that post rooms for students. Sometimes it's also scammy, so you have to be careful. And one of the main tips I would say is do not pay any money before you see the place, before you see the room in person, if that's possible. Uniplaces does take payment before you see the place, but I'm not recommending them, so I won't talk about that. But from my experience, I'm giving you tips. Do not pay any money until you see the place in person. No matter how much the landlady or landlord may seem so trustworthy, I wouldn't advise it. I would say that consider to come here, find a room temporarily or accommodation temporarily if you can afford it, and then while you're here in Portugal, you search your room on site. Then you can go there, you can look, you can sniff it out if it's real or not. Another tip I'll say is always see photos or videos of the rooms and try to verify the landlords. There isn't a way how to verify them, but just trust your intuition. Make sure you see photos and videos of the room. Don't decide to rent a room, and that goes hand in hand with seeing a place in person before you move there. So it's great when it has clear photos and videos, and if it doesn't, of course, visiting in person and comparing what you see online is also important, because sometimes, you know, like when people have the latest iPhone, it may widen the space and the room looks more massive, and when you go there it's very small. That has happened to me several times, so checking in person is very helpful. The other tip I will say is try your best to be careful in avoiding scams. Trust your intuition. Scammers are even on trusted platforms, and they've gotten so good. I remember almost being scammed. If it wasn't for my mom, I would have been scammed, probably because the person wrote me through like Airbnb. It looked so legit, and they posted on Airbnb and they told me about themselves, and I was like, okay, but the price, looking back now, was a little bit too good to be true for a 1-bedroom apartment. But yeah, just be careful. The other thing I said is join the Facebook groups. That can be a helpful resource. And on the topic of Facebook groups, I'm also trying to gain more traction and build a stronger big community on a Facebook group that I started, which is for students living in Portugal or planning to move to Portugal. So if you're interested in that, I'll put the link to the Facebook group in the description and also in the comments, and you can join. I just want to say that when you are joining, please answer the group questions. If you don't answer them for me, I'm gonna think like 70% or more that you're a scam account, or you are not really interested in the group. You're just joining and you plan to be like a silent member of the group, which is what I don't want. I really want to build a community for students in Portugal. My goal is for it to be really comprehensive, where you can find people, make friends, learn skills, you know, have a comprehensive resource for living and studying in Portugal. So join the group, be active. Maybe I don't know, let's see. Just join the group and let's see how that grows, because I really want to I really want to start doing in-person meetups in Portugal so we can meet each other, talk, and such like that. Also, I want to say, make sure your profile photo is decent and clear, because sometimes people be trying to join the group with no profile photo, I won't accept that, because obviously that's a scam. If you're not a scam and you don't have a profile photo, that's a huge red flag. And also, like, someone trying to join the group with their face is like covered in their profile photo, like, no. Just please have a clear photo, answer the questions, make sure your account is verifiable, and let's build this community. Okay, next point. Your rights as a student, safety, legal stuff, a little bit. So, is Portugal safe? Portugal is one of the safest countries in the world. Well, in Europe. I've seen that a lot, like people posting evidence about that, and it's known for its low crime rate, its relaxed and welcoming culture and atmosphere. And I felt that too. I do feel that in Portugal. I feel very safe as a woman, as a black woman, walking around, because sometimes when I play football, I may come home a little bit later than usual, and I have to walk alone in the streets. Well, not alone, and I feel pretty safe. So, and cities like Lisbon, Porto, Coimbra, these are usually student hubs with good, like, international student communities. So you will also more than likely find other international students who are in your class, or maybe not in your class, but in your university, especially if you're doing an English program. But of course, be careful too, because like any city, there's petty theft. I remember when I just came, I had someone who I got to know them, and every time we were walking out, they would say like, "Oh, hold your bag, hold your this, hold this," and it's like, yeah, I would say just be careful, of course, especially when you're in a busier area, because as I said, petty theft does exist. But generally, I feel very, very safe in Portugal. With that said, let's go over your rights as a student. And yeah, will be brief. I'm just giving off the top of my head what I know, but you can also research yourself to confirm. So when you have your residence permit, you have a right to work up to 20 hours per week during school time and full time during the holidays. I know someone who worked more than 20 hours per week, and what she did is she contacted SEF at the time. Before there was IMA, there was SEF, and notified them of that. So probably you have that option as well if you find a job that works well with your school schedule, that you can do for more than 20 hours per week. Of course, everyone residence card, whatever, varies, and maybe you are allowed to work more than 20 hours. But from what I know, especially when I just came here and I got my residence card, it says on the back straightforwardly that I can only work maximum 20 hours per week. Like, I can only conduct maximum 20 hours per week of professional activity. The other right you have is access to public health care with proper documentation, which I will talk about a little bit more. And you also have access to opening a bank account, signing legal contracts that applies to you, renting housing, especially when you have your necessary documentation like your residence permit and the right numbers, like your tax number and your social security number and stuff like that. So Portugal has a public healthcare system which is called Serviço Nacional de Saúde, SNS, and it is known to be both accessible and affordable. But as an international student, when you're from the EU, you can use their public healthcare system with your European health insurance card. Non-EU students will need private insurance, especially, or at least when you're applying for your visa. I applied for my private insurance through AXA, and you can check my video on applying for a student visa to study in Portugal to get more information on that and how to purchase that and the company that I used. but you will need private insurance, whether you have it from your home country and that applies to Portugal, or whether you end up buying it from a reputable company. You will need private insurance when moving here. And when you have private insurance, I would say you can transition to the public healthcare system when you have a not social security, when you have a public healthcare number. So now that you have an understanding about that, you may be curious about the language and cultural barriers. Is English enough, or do you need to learn Portuguese? In Portugal, most of the courses are in Portuguese. However, you will find some courses in English. As you can see, in my case, I took a risk, and I won't recommend that coming to Portugal doing a course that's like 90% in Portuguese. I won't recommend that unless you're extremely self-driven, adaptable. And even then, I wouldn't recommend it, because what if your university, your teachers, your colleagues are not as open as, you know, the experience that I had. So what I would recommend is apply for English programs directly in Portugal, or in your home country. Try to learn Portuguese up to a B2 level, and then apply to study here in a Portuguese program, because having knowledge in the B2 level will also help you to gain like jobs, because if a job is looking for someone with some fluency in Portuguese, you already have that. So I recommend that. Regarding cultural adjustment, I would say it was not difficult for me. Portugal is a great country. It's open, and Lisbon is very diverse, which helped me a lot. Seeing people that look like me, people who don't look like me, it helped me a lot to feel at home, I would say. On top of that, I created a good friend group. Like now I have a good friend group, a good church community. And I have said a lot in my videos too that Portugal reminds me a lot of Jamaica. And I would say that once you are open-minded, adaptable, and also willing to learn the language a little bit, it helps. However, you can survive knowing English only, but I wouldn't recommend that, because I feel like when you know Portuguese, as I said, you are open to more opportunities, and I do feel like people are more open with you because they saw that you made an effort to learn their language. And it's also just downright polite and awesome to learn a language, you know. So that's great. My main tip is just being open that things are different around the world. But the main thing is finding your community, because 100% of the time, your community will experience what you are experiencing as well. And that will help you to cope. That's why I'm trying to build a community for students, because this will help you to have a better experience while studying in Portugal. So I found people like me. I found a good church, which helped a lot. And because, for example, I found that one of the things that was difficult for me in the beginning was I thought that I would make better friends with my classmates, especially because we're in the film industry, and with film, like, networking is key, but that didn't really happen. I think because of my lack of Portuguese, it affects how you really connect with people sometimes. And I also felt that my Portuguese colleagues were more closed, I would say. They were very friendly and open, but closed, you know, so that made it even more difficult. But I ended up finding community, which helps. So find your community, whether your community is with Portuguese or a mixture of Portuguese and expats, that's up to you. As I come down to the end of this video, I just want to cover or expound a little bit more on life after studying. How is life like after you came here, after you learned the language, after you pursued your degree, and how is life like? Is there network and academic support? I would say that highly depends on your university. As I mentioned above, my university was not the best with that network or academic support. So you have to seek that out mostly on your own. I would say that Lisbon is, my experience in Lisbon is that it's a great hub for creatives or people with different interests. So you can network like on your own efforts and build like a good support after your studies. Usually, I want to answer the question if it's easy to transition after you finish your studies to a resident. I think if there were better job opportunities in Portugal, I would say yes. And in my opinion, the job market is not as good as I hoped. You can watch one of my latest videos where I reflect on my 3 years in Portugal. And this was a huge problem for me, the job crisis. It would have helped a lot if it was much easier to find a job after studying. But the job opportunities were just so limited, I would say, and that affects with the transition. Because when you want to transition from a study permit to a work permit, it really depends a lot on if you find a job after your studies. So I would say that the transition from a student to like work career life, especially if you think that, okay, you want to stay in Portugal, you love the language, the people, and you want to contribute to the Portuguese society, I would say it's not ideal, especially if you're not in the IT field because of the lack of job opportunities. So Portugal might be more ideal for coming and getting your studies and then maybe going back to your home country and finding jobs there or whatever the case is. Yes, and regarding internships, I didn't have to do an internship during my studies. I'm not quite sure. But probably internships are more available. Probably because you don't get paid in an internship, you will find an internship much easier. But the transition, I would say that's the rough part. Transitioning and finding a job, that's the rough part, I would say, in this whole process in Portugal. If you are a non-EU national, you need to apply for a D visa before coming to Portugal after you get admitted to your university in Portugal. Usually you apply at the Portuguese consulate or embassy in your home country or the one nearest to you. In Jamaica, the one nearest to us that does like long-term D visas was the one in Caracas, Venezuela, and that's the one that I use. If you're non-EU, I'm sure the process is much, if you're EU citizen, I'm sure the process is much easier for you. I'm guessing you apply for the university before you move to Portugal, and then when you come to Portugal, within 3 months, you declare your residency at the respective authorities. Say that university admissions in Portugal is not that competitive. Like, no offense, but reason being, for me, I feel like studying in Portugal is not that sought after if you're looking for like a top tier university. So I would say based on that, the competitiveness to be admitted to universities here is not that high on that regard. Sometimes you're applying for a university in Portugal and the website, the interface might be confusing. If you're confused, that's normal. Don't worry about that. I also experience a lot of confusion. Yeah, I also experience a lot of confusion. I feel like I'm not the only one because I heard it from someone else. Like, it's just sometimes difficult to understand what they may be asking for, or also sometimes difficult to navigate the Portuguese interface, or even when they have translation, like when you see at the top right hand corner the option to to have the English version of the website. If you see Portuguese on the English version of your university website, you're not the only one. I just feel like the UX UI interfaces, web interfaces sometimes for Portuguese institutions is not that updated, just my experience. So if you are confused, you're not alone. What I would say is just be persistent, just go for it, just fill out the application as best you can. And the university will sometimes let you know, well, my university let me know like what I missed, what document, I missed one document, and they wrote me an email and asked for it. And also just write to the university if you need help. I feel like they would not hesitate to help you. Maybe they will take a little bit long to reply, but just go for it and be persistent. The attitude of persistence in moving to Portugal is like a big thing. You need that. Even if something just seems so chaotic, confusing, and difficult on the get-go, just pursue and apply for that university. Okay, so you've made it to the end of the video. You are a warrior. You really want this information, and I'm so happy to give it because I'm making a video that I would have wanted to watch while I was researching YouTube videos on moving to Portugal. I know this was long. Maybe you were one of the people who put in your headphones and listen to this like a podcast, or maybe you were one of the people who just tough it out, as we would say in Jamaica, and watch me like face to face this whole video. But whatever you did, kudos to you. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to like, share, and subscribe because it helps a lot. It motivates me, especially when you comment too, talking about this or saying the video was helpful or asking for additional info or ask me to make a video on something. That helps me a lot. I know that, okay, this is what people want to see, this is what people want to know, so please interact with this video. And you can also buy me a coffee if you felt like this information was too good to be free. I will put the link somewhere, description, comment somewhere. And maybe I make like a PDF with all this info about Portugal along with all the info in my visa application video. So if you are interested in a PDF like that you can reference and that you want to buy through like my Buy Me a Coffee account, which probably I'll just put it at €5 like the cost of a coffee, let me know and I will make it. And thank you for watching, thank you for tuning in. I'm finally at the end of this video. Like, you don't know how many times I've tried to record this video. I'm finally at the end. Thank you, take care, and see you in another video. Why did I do this? See you in another video. Bye.